We begin the procedure just by checking the tooth to ensure that it is the one that needs to be endodontically treated. And then continue with anesthetic as we do with other procedures. So I'm checking to make sure anesthetic has taken effect. And then we'll put the dam on. And the assistant stretches the hole over the tooth so that the clamp can easily go on top of the dam. Like that. Good. Now we're ready to begin. So we use the high-speed handpiece. Make sure that there is no water on and the handpiece itself is turned on. So we cut the tooth dry. So we've entered into the pulp, and now we'll widen the chamber with the slow speed handpiece. The operator picks up the barbed broach and initially enters the canal to remove remnants of pulp, while the assistant takes a wet cotton roll, and what we'll do is just wipe the remnants off on the cotton roll, and the operator can determine what stage of necrosis or infection the tooth is at. And once we're finished using the barbed broach, it gets inserted into the end of the cotton roll, and then it's disposed of in the sharps. Irrigation with the sodium hypochlorite followed by the smear clear. Sodium hypochlorite will be the syringe with the orange tab on it, and the smear clear will have no color. The operator then takes the 15 file and inserts it into the canal, and determining the feel from inside the canal will place the file at the approximate depth or length of the canal. To find out if that's the perfect length, we're going to use an apex locator. The apex locator sits on the counter, and there's two cords that have to be attached. The loop goes inside the patient's cheek, and then there's the attachment to the file that you hook onto the file, and then the operator will press the button on the apex locator, and the machine does the rest for you. It will sound an alarm or beep to let us know that the apex has been located. So we've determined the length of the canal, so the apex locator can be removed. And the 15 file is the length that we want measured for the rest of the files in the canal. So I place the items used on the gauze square closest to the assistant, and from there she'll wipe it off, removing the debris. Place the file in the bead sterilizer to sterilize. After 15 seconds, the file can be removed, and then use the endodontic measuring gauge to measure the length of the file. Now the file can be replaced into the sponge, and the assistant will measure the 20 and 25 files to the same length. Now notice that the files are all placed on the outside of this sponge, and when the assistant places them back, they're placed back into the same spot. And we're working clockwise on the outside of the sponge. So now the 20 file can be used in the canal. Followed by the 25 file that's already been measured. And then we're going to irrigate. Now, knowing that the sodium hypochlorite has the orange ring and the smear clear has the plain, it doesn't matter what position they are in the assistant's hand. The operator takes the sodium hypochlorite first. Now the assistant will measure the orifice openers, or the coronal flaring instruments, they're called the same thing, to the same length as the files that were used in the canal. So the sponge is used as the transferring area for these small instruments for safety. Okay, and then after the coronal flaring devices are used, we'll irrigate. And then we'll go back to the 25 file. Because it's been measured and sterilized and we put back on the sponge, we can reuse it. And then we'll irrigate again. And the assistant is constantly busy measuring the rotary files and keeping them in the sponge and wiping and sterilizing the rest of the files for use while the operator uses them in the canal. So now I've used the 8 and 6 rotary files, and we'll irrigate again. Now we move down to the remaining 2 files, the 4 and now the 2. And we'll irrigate again. So now we change the suction to the endo ease suction tip, because now we're ready to dry the canal. So the operator inserts the endo ease in the canal to dry initial moisture out of the canal. And then we follow up with paper points. And there's 2 different sizes, and the amount of paper points depends on the moisture in the canal, and you just keep on placing the paper points in the canal until the last one comes out dry. So they're used as a bit of a wicking procedure. So once the drying is complete, we're now ready to start with the filling. So what we'll do is transfer the items that we've used up to this point in the procedure, and we'll bring in the equipment used for filling. So the assistant will take the syringes and put them up on the counter. The measuring device goes up on the counter. The bead sterilizer is no longer needed. We put that up on the counter. And we can pull over the touch and heat and the Obtura gun. Bring the touch and heat. And the Obtura gun, pull that down. Just be careful with all the cords that we don't tangle up the cords, and when you're passing items that they don't make you fumble. So the Obtura gun just sits in this holder, and it's pretty tight to get out. So just loosen it up a bit so that it's easy to transfer, and then have it on the counter at the side. And then your touch and heat snaps up from the corner of the box. So just be careful when you're setting those things up. You're finished now with the endo ease, so we're going to take that out of our suction and replace it with the suction tip that we'll use again later. So that we've got everything kind of transitioned and changed over. I'm no longer going to use the files for the procedure because we're finished with the files, but I'll need my burr back in the slow speed. So I'll put that back on. And the 2 sponges that the assistant has here that we've used with the contaminated items, those can be disposed of. We don't need those anymore. And the sponges that will be used are disinfected, or they're soaked with sodium hypochlorite. And these are the ones that the assistant is going to be using in her right hand. And then we're going to be using powder the crown and bridge powder to coat the condensers as we use them to condense the material in the mouth. Now we're simulating our canal sealer, so this pad is sitting here, and this is our simulated root canal sealer. And then the simulated cavit is sitting right here for us for our final filling, for our temporary filling. So we've got everything kind of shifted around, and now the second phase is starting. So what I'm going to do first of all is take the gutta percha point, and I'm going to take the 25 file and just kind of eyeball or measure it for the length of the canal. And because these things have been sterilized and put back in the sponge, I'm okay touching them and reusing them. So before we go ahead and cement this in place, we have to make sure that it's the proper length. So we'll just set this inside the canal, and then we'll take a radiograph. Now we could take a digital radiograph, or we can take a film, and it's just going to depend on the office that we're working at. Just going to make a little hole here. So I'm just going to set this in the dam to simulate that this is in the canal. And we'll take a film, and this is to identify whether or not that point is to the apex. Okay, so we've exposed it. Now the assistant will bring back the film, and from here I'll just sort of eyeball to see if the gutta percha is to the point. It is, and we're satisfied with this, so I will indicate to go ahead and mix the cement. So the assistant is going to mix the pulp canal sealer. Sometimes, you know, we can fine-tune the end of it, wipe it off with a gauze that has sodium hypochlorite on it, just to wait for the assistant to mix the cement. So now the cement would be mixed on this pad, so I'll wipe the gutta percha point in the cement and just lay it there to wait for the cement to be placed in the canal. So now I'm going to take the Lentulo spiral filling instrument from the middle of this sponge, and I'm going to take the cement on that pad and put it on this Lentulo and insert it in the canal and spin it around inside the canal so that there's cement on the walls of the canal as well as on the outside of the gutta percha. So once I'm finished with this, I'll just lay this down so that it doesn't contaminate the other sponges. And I'll take this gutta percha, and place it in the canal. So now we're ready to heat this up and sort of melt it into place. So the assistant is going to pass the heated up touch and heat. Now remember that this is very hot. So she passes this to me, and then she'll take the number 10 condenser and wipe the end of it with the soaked sodium hypochlorite sponge, dip it in the powder, and transfer it. So now I'm going to condense that gutta percha point and continue condensing and heating until that whole point is in the canal. Now she's handed me the 9. And she wipes the ends after every use. And then I have the 8. So once I've finished with the 8 condenser, now we're ready for the Obtura gun. So this is where we do a two-handed transfer because it's safety. The hot spreader is taken away and the Obtura gun is passed, and the Obtura gun will be inserted in the canal for the warm gutta percha to fill up the remainder of the canal. And we will continue condensing with the number 8 condenser. And then we'll take more gutta perca. And then we'll follow it with the number 9 condenser. And then finally, we finish off with the number 10 condenser. So now this entire gutta perca point will be packed to the apex, and then will be backpacked with the rest of the gutta perca from the Obtura gun. So we're finished with the 10 condenser. So now I'm going to take the slow speed handpiece with the round burr and just clean out the coronal portion of the crown in case some of the cement or the gutta perca has stuck to the walls inside the crown. And some of the debris will be coming out, so it depends if there's a little bit of debris, whether or not you need some suction. Okay, and now we'll just fill up the crown with the cavet. So the cavet is used with the plastic filling instrument. And it just extrudes out of the tube like toothpaste. So pass that to the operator on the plastic filling instrument. And then we'll just smooth out the back with a wet cotton pellet. And we're ready for dam removal. At this point, we'll use a double film. And this is the one that we'll develop, and we'll keep one film for our own records. And we'll send another film to the referring dentist. And if we're using digital, we'll have an image on the screen that will tell us what the results are of our endo. And we'll send our patient home with post-operative instructions.